You remember your fifth birthday party, the cake, the balloons, your mother's laugh. You can see it clearly. You would swear to it in a courtroom. But here's the strange part. Most of that memory never happened the way you think it did. Your brain built it, piece by piece, like a movie stitched together from scraps of film that don't quite match. And it did this without asking your permission. You trust your memory more than almost anything else in your life. It tells you who you are. It tells you what you've survived, who you've loved, what you're afraid of. But what if the recording device in your head was never a camera at all? What if it was something closer to a storyteller that edits every single time you press play? This isn't a metaphor. This is how memory actually works. In the 1930s, a British psychologist named Frederic Bartlett ran a strange experiment. He read people a Native American folk tale called The War of the Ghosts. The story was unfamiliar, slightly confusing, full of details that didn't fit neatly into a Western narrative. Then he asked his subjects to recall it, not once, over and over across weeks, sometimes months. Something remarkable happened. The retellings didn't just get shorter, they got different. Strange details vanished, new details appeared, details that had never existed in the original story. People filled gaps with things that felt familiar to them. A canoe became a boat. A hunting trip became a war. Nobody was lying. Every person believed completely that they were remembering the story exactly as it was told. Bartlett called this reconstructive memory. Your brain, he argued, doesn't file away experiences like documents in a cabinet. It rebuilds them from fragments every time you try to recall them. And every rebuild is influenced by who you are right now. Your mood, your beliefs, what you've learned since, what you needed the memory to mean. Think about that for a second. Every time you remember something, you are not opening a file. You are writing a new draft. Decades later, a cognitive psychologist named Elizabeth Loftus took this idea somewhere far more unsettling. She wanted to know if false memories could not just distort, but be planted entirely from scratch. So she designed a study now famous in psychology circles. Researchers gave people a short booklet containing 4 childhood stories, supposedly provided by family members. 3 of the stories were true, 1 was completely fabricated. It described the subject getting lost in a shopping mall at around age 5, crying, and eventually being rescued by an elderly stranger. None of this had happened, but by the end of the study, a striking number of participants weren't just accepting the fake memory, they were elaborating on it, adding sensory details, describing what the stranger's flannel shirt looked like, describing how frightened they'd felt. Some of them, when told afterward that the memory was fabricated, refused to believe it. Their brain had already built the scene, lit it, scored it, and filed it away as real. It felt real because remembering and imagining use almost the same machinery in your brain. Your mind doesn't have a separate department for fiction. So if that's true, how do you know which of your memories are solid ground and which ones are quicksand? Here's the uncomfortable answer. You mostly don't. Confidence is not evidence. This has been shown again and again in memory research. The clarity of a memory, the emotional weight of it, the vividness of the details, none of these reliably predict whether it's accurate. Some of your most vivid memories, the ones you'd bet your life on, are the ones most likely to have been reshaped over time. Psychologist Ulrich Neisser studied this using what are called flashbulb memories. Moments so shocking, so emotionally intense, that people feel certain they'll remember every detail forever. Where you were, who you were with, what you were wearing. Neisser studied people's memories of the Challenger space shuttle disaster in 1986. He asked students to write down the very next day exactly how they heard the news. Then he asked the same students years later to recall it again. The results should worry you a little. Many of the later accounts were wildly different from the ones written the day after. Different locations, different companions, different emotional reactions. And yet the students describing these new altered versions were just as confident, sometimes more confident, than they'd been the first time. Their brains hadn't stored a flashbulb photograph. They'd built a new photograph and slapped the old certainty onto it. There's a related phenomenon that makes all of this even stranger. Researchers Henry Roediger and Kathleen McDermott developed a simple test in the 1990s. They read people a list of related words: bed, rest, awake, tired, dream, blanket, snore. None of the words on the list was actually sleep, but when asked afterward if sleep had been on the list, most participants said yes, confidently. Sometimes they even described exactly where in the list they remembered hearing it. Your brain had filled in a gap using logic, using pattern, using expectation, and it did this so smoothly that you never noticed the seam. That's the part that should really land. You never noticed the seam. That's not a flaw that happens occasionally under unusual conditions. That is how memory operates, constantly, quietly, every single day. Every time you tell a story about your own past, you are not retrieving it. You are reconstructing it, live, using whatever material is closest at hand. Old photographs, other people's retellings, your current mood, your current sense of who you are. Why would evolution build a memory system this unreliable? Wouldn't a perfect recording be more useful for survival? Actually, no. A perfect recording would be a burden. Your ancestors didn't need a flawless archive of every sunset and every meal. They needed something faster and more flexible. A system built to extract the useful pattern and discard the rest. Was that berry bush safe or dangerous? Was that sound a predator or the wind? Memory that generalizes, that blends similar experiences together, that updates itself based on new information, is actually more efficient for survival than memory that preserves perfect, isolated detail. You didn't inherit a camera. You inherited a prediction engine, one that's constantly asking, given everything I've experienced, what probably happened here. This changes how you should think about the arguments you have with people who were there for the same event you were. Your sibling remembers the family vacation differently than you do. Your old friend swears the conversation went a completely different way. You've probably assumed one of you is lying or one of you has a worse memory, but it's more likely that both of you built different, equally sincere reconstructions from the same raw material. Neither of you is remembering the event. You're each remembering your own most recent retelling of it. It also changes how you should treat your own worst memories, the ones that haunt you, the humiliating moment, the argument that still stings years later. Some of the sharpest edges on those memories may not be accurate reflections of what happened. They may be edits, sharpened by every time you replayed the scene, shaped by shame or anger you were feeling long after the actual event ended. That doesn't mean the pain wasn't real. It means the story you've been telling yourself about the pain has been quietly rewritten again and again without your consent. There's another layer to this that most people never think about. Every time you recall a memory, you don't just view it, you handle it, and handling changes it. Researchers call this reconsolidation. The idea is simple but strange. When a memory gets pulled out of storage, it briefly becomes unstable, almost like wet clay, before it gets filed away again. Whatever you're feeling in that moment, whatever new information is floating around you, can get folded into the memory as it resettles. So the act of remembering something isn't neutral. It's an act of quiet editing, performed by you, on you, without a signature, without a receipt. This is part of why old grudges can grow sharper with age instead of fading. Each time you replay the argument in your head, you're not accessing the original recording. You're accessing last week's edit of it and adding a little more resentment before you put it back on the shelf. It's also part of why nostalgia can feel so warm and golden. Each replay smooths out a rough edge, brightens a color, softens a face. By the 10th retelling, the version in your head may share only a loose resemblance to the version that actually happened. Courtrooms have learned this the hard way. Eyewitness testimony was once treated as close to unshakable proof. A witness pointing at a defendant used to be one of the most persuasive things a jury could hear. But decades of research, much of it built on Loftus's work, have shown that eyewitness memory can be shifted by something as small as the wording of a question. Ask someone how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other instead of when they contacted each other, and people will report higher speeds and sometimes even remember broken glass that was never there. The memory isn't just being described differently, it's being altered at the source. None of this means your memory is broken. It means your memory was never built to be a filing cabinet in the first place. It was built to be useful, not accurate. It was built to help you recognize danger, recognize people, recognize patterns, quickly and efficiently, even if that meant sacrificing perfect detail. A brain that remembered everything with total precision would drown in irrelevant information. A brain that remembers the gist, the emotional shape, the general pattern of an experience can act faster, adapt faster, and survive longer. Distortion isn't a bug in the system, it's the price of a system built for speed. So, the next time a memory surfaces crisp and certain, sitting in your mind like an old photograph you could reach out and touch, pause for just a second. Ask yourself what you're actually looking at, not a record, a reconstruction. Built this morning, out of yesterday's fragments, dressed up to look like something permanent. You've spent your whole life trusting a narrator who edits the manuscript every single time you open the book. And the strangest part isn't that your memories are somewhat unreliable. The strangest part is how convincing the fiction feels. Tonight, when you replay a memory from years ago, remember this. You're not watching the past. You're watching tonight's rewrite of it, and you never noticed your memories are actually fiction.